Hey folks, today we're going to be taking a look at Dev Diary 17 Bankruptcy for Grey Eminence. We're just going to get straight into it. It's not a huge Dev Diary, but there's some interesting news at the end, so do stick around if you're watching this. But we're just going to get straight into it. We're continuing the series of Dev Diaries dedicated to the economy with another spicy topic, bankruptcy. So yeah, the last, like I say, 3 or 4 Dev Diaries have all been about the economy, so hopefully we get some war-based ones soon or something like that, but I'm not complaining. The economy is obviously a large part of the game, but yeah, another one on bankruptcy was inflation last time. While the word bankruptcy might evoke images of modern financial institutions, in Grey Eminence, this phenomenon can occur on any production building as opposed to default, which is the tangentially related process for countries that we'll cover another time. So we're going to get another Dev Diary about defaulting rather than bankruptcy. So I guess that's defaulting on loans and things like that. Bankruptcy is the process through which an unprofitable building goes through when it runs out of money. Thanks to bankruptcy, building owners aren't locked into eating losses from an unprofitable venture infinitely, and workers aren't locked into working for lower wages than they deserve, though we can attempt to migrate if their country's law will allow it. Bankruptcy is the cleansing fire that makes room for a new building and ends up resulting in a more efficient allocation of capital, so it's an important part of the overall economic simulation. So yeah, I guess because there's only limited building slots, kind of, it does work differently in this game if you're new to the Dev Diaries. I think they covered in one of the early ones on buildings. I do have a playlist with all the Dev Diaries on there, but yeah, buildings don't have like slots like you see most strategy games. Each county is basically made up of tiles, and buildings use a certain amount of tiles, and you can like fill up the tiles however you want. There's not like 5 slots and you can put 5 buildings in. There's like 50 tiles, and those tiles can be used up by different things as well, like trees, like forests can use up those tiles. So if you don't cut down the forest, you actually have a limited amount of building space, which is kind of an interesting way of doing it. I've not seen it before in a game like this. So yeah, obviously this is a way of getting rid of, if you have a building that maybe, I'm thinking a simple would be, I'm not sure if this is exactly how it works, but if you have like coal mines, if they run out of coal, obviously the buildings are basically useless and they would go bankrupt when they run out of coal. And this looks like a way of getting rid of those buildings and replacing them with something else. So that's just an example, just so you can kind of think, I think, how the game is going to see it. I'm not sure if coal is like gets reduced and disappears, but we'll see. Actually, I think in a previous one they've said it did. There's been, like I said, this is what, the 17th Dev Diary? I don't remember exactly all of them anymore, but vaguely I remember they did say things like coal do deplenish over time. So, treasuries. We already described how buildings work in a Dev Diary dedicated to production, which is the one I was just talking about. We've made one major addition to the system since then, which allows us to model bankruptcy on an individual building basis. Previously, buildings create a direct link between the owner's treasury and their revenues and expenses, so whenever a building had wages to pay, it would subtract those wages straight out the treasury of the owner. While more efficient in terms of processing, this design choice had the unfortunate effect of making bankruptcy a per-owner process, so a single owner could effectively subsidize their unprofitable buildings with profitable ones, and if their treasury goes to zero, all buildings undergo bankruptcy. But yeah, that's not a good way how that works, is it? So basically just one fund and all buildings would kind of pay into that fund. So if you made no money, it didn't really matter because the other buildings were kind of subsidizing your bad building. But yeah, it looks like basically what they're doing here is they're changing it so each building now has its own treasury. If you play Victoria 3, it works that way in Victoria. Your country obviously has its own treasury, but then each building has its own treasury as well, has its own buildup of money. With how it works and things like that. So it looks like they're going that way. So each building has money. So one building can be unprofitable and have ill effects, and it's not going to affect all the other buildings. In fact, the other buildings might do better because there might be, 5 of the same building. If one of them goes bankrupt, the other 4 probably going to do better anyway. So this system, I think, is way better. Entering bankruptcy has several immediate effects on a building. Firstly, its size gets cut in half, and if its size is already 1, the building gets destroyed. Secondly, its wage modifier gets reduced to its default value if it was above it. So yeah, if you're overpaying salaries, it will just cut it to the base amount. So I guess maybe if you've forgotten you've left it on high, or just for some reason you're struggling to attract people. If it's bankrupt, you can't still overpay the workers because it's not making any money. So as a reminder, from the distant days of Dev Diary 13, wages are a function of 2 parameters: the balance of labour supply demand and the building's individual wage modifier. So this effectively speeds up the building's attempt to return to profitability. by cutting wages. So obviously you might lose some people from working there. They might move on to other jobs, but you're not exacerbating the negative effects of the wages. So yeah, nice. It's a pretty good way of working it. Pretty obvious as well. If you're not super into economics, you can understand how that works. Once the above process has been completed, the building's owner is given a choice to refill the building's treasury partially or put it up for auction. There are a bunch of factors determining which option the owner is more likely to pick. Obviously, if the owner doesn't have the money required, it will go to auction. But even if they have the necessary cash, they might still decide to give the building up. Each elite has its own weights for buildings it prefers to keep versus sell. For example, the nobility is biased towards rural buildings, whereas the merchants favour urban ones, which can be additionally be modified by cultural customs, country laws, and events. So, yeah, interesting way this is going to work. So, they might, I guess this is just where they've got buildings that they no longer want. Obviously, like we've discussed before, the game does progress 600 years, so I imagine you might end up having buildings that don't really match your ethos, I guess. As like a merchant, you might have just acquired buildings you don't actually want. And yeah, if they're unprofitable, if they're unprofitable, you could in theory auction them off, or you could just keep them. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to for how that works versus it just destroys them or something like that. So kind of interesting. I thought the buildings would just get destroyed or they just return to profitability and works, but yeah, they can actually sell them to other people, which is interesting. During an auction, different buyers get a chance to buy the building. By default, the potential buyers are the other elites in the province and the local population, provided they have the money to buy it. However, once international finance emerges, foreign participants may also join in the auction, assuming the building's country law permits it, providing an extra avenue for economic imperialism of the emerging capitalist class in the second half of the game. Oh, this is super interesting then. Yeah, so this is saying, let's say you're England and France. If France is having issues, if they've got buildings going bankrupt, maybe they've had a war that's gone on too long, or I don't know, I guess maybe a famine and there's not enough people to work in a building and then ends up going bankrupt. Later on in the game, as England, if you have loads of money, you could start buying up France's industry, basically. And although it isn't in your country, you'd own them and I guess make the money from them and make decisions based on it. And I wonder, I guess maybe your elite can buy their stuff, which you'd have no control over. Although it does say there are laws, so I imagine there's laws where you can block it. Say nobles from your country can't invest in other countries. And I guess as a country, you can say, mercantilism or whatever, and you lock down like no outside foreign investment in my country. Because yeah, that actually shows the not the difficulty, like the depth of the economic side of the game, because yeah, I guess there's some cool ways you could end up owning another country's buildings and cause problems for them. If you ended up buying up all their tank production or whatever, you could, just shut them down or just intentionally just try and destroy them, or yeah, it'd be interesting, like the different ways you could use this. I imagine it'll get covered in a future dev diary, but yeah, I actually quite like how that's going to work. Each auction starts at a heavily discounted baseline price determined by the building's size and potentially profitability post-bankruptcy. Each participant then decides how much they like the building, and then they basically just bid on it, and whoever bids the most wins. As soon as a new owner has been decided, the final auction price gets transferred to the previous owner of the building. Workers naturally get nothing, unless they were the owners, of course. And the new owner refills the treasury to its minimal amount and allowing it to resume production. So, yeah, that's, again, another cool function of this, I guess, because obviously the people who sold it then do have some money, and maybe they'll build another building, maybe they'll use it for something else. So, kind of cycle restarts again at that point. Over time, bankruptcies tend to diversify the ownership of the economy, since it's unlikely for the same buyer to always come out on the top of every auction. While the nobility might be more likely to prioritize rural buildings, purchasing too many slightly profitable or still unprofitable rural buildings will deplete their ability to participate in future auctions. True. The bankruptcy process acts as a counterweight to the accumulation of capital. So yeah, they're basically saying, like, if a one section of your elites has loads of money, eventually they'll just keep buying buildings, and then obviously, ultimately, they won't have enough free money to then carry on buying buildings. So another faction might start buying buildings, and it kind of naturally kind of the ebb and flow of ownership will occur naturally just because of how much money you have on hand. And that's basically how it's going to work. While you, the player, can't participate in auctions directly. Oh, no. I actually thought that's how it was going to work. That'd be cool if you could, although I guess it'd be really hard to balance. We experiment with triggering events for each bankruptcy, but as you can imagine, this got annoying very fast. Yeah, I imagine if you have a large realm and each county can have multiple buildings, it would get super annoying. Like, really annoying to constantly have bankruptcies. Maybe you could, like, trigger it, like, pass a law where you can, or some kind of option where you could say, I want to get involved. Maybe in certain buildings you could, like, toggle, like, okay, only these buildings I'm interested in. But I actually see how this probably works out better anyway, because I imagine as a player, you could. It'd open up ways for abuse, I think. Because obviously as a player, you're much smarter than a machine for most cases. So I think you'd be able to game it a little bit too much. But good to see they've thought about it and tried it. You can always front-run the process by buying out the building's owners before it goes bankrupt. Oh, so you can buy it anyway if you want to. Unlike the elites and population, you can always configure the wages of state-owned buildings throughout your country via the wage setting in the budget, which we covered in Dev Diary 15. In addition, you can also resettle more people to reduce labour costs or even purchase slaves via the slave market if you really wanted to do that. So you have the advantage of turning businesses to profitability, assuming, of course, you can afford the bureaucratic overhead of running them. So yeah, you can actually buy unprofitable buildings. And maybe they're unprofitable because they have no workers. And then obviously as you run the country, you can funnel workers into that area. And then maybe you can turn that building around and make some money. So again, that's a cool way of how that works. And then here we go, a nice UI. I'm not sure about this map. I've discussed this before. I'm not sure if this is like a placeholder map, but it looks weird. So we'll see. Well, they're going to talk about it in a second. So we'll see about that in the future. But there we go, the UI. These are the buildings in, does it say where this is? Nanjing province in China, I believe. Doesn't say, but I'm pretty sure it's in China. It looks like this is the Chinese coast here. But I do apologize if it's not, but that's my guess. And yeah, this is obviously the province. This is all the buildings. They've got rice paddies, pastures, logging camp, silk plantation, and tailoring workshop. And as you can see, the tailoring workshop here is making no money. It's losing money. Losing 2 gold, 12 a month, I guess. Or a day, I guess a month. And but it hasn't got many workers, but I guess it's a workshop, so it would have less workers and everything else. These are fully staffed, I guess. I guess this 100 means they're fully staffed. Constructing a tailoring workshop right next to its source of input goods might be a good idea. That's what the merchant thought. But in reality, the small workshop is unable to compete with the massive tailoring industry in nearby Nanjing. Oh, so no, this isn't Nanjing. It's a province next to Nanjing. And they're basically saying, like, hey, he built this. The AI thought, oh, I'll build a tailoring workshop because I could use the silk to, make clothing. But the problem is, next door is a upgraded tailoring workshop, I guess, which is more profitable. So all the silk, I guess, is just gets sent to them, and this just isn't working out for them. So again, kind of interesting to see. It'd be fun to see how this works. This could be a part of the game, I think, that could be super broken if they're not careful, because if the AI can still build things in the wrong place, like, that's cool, it makes sense, and more games could do with doing that, but I imagine it could go wrong pretty badly if they don't balance it correctly. You could just have the AI just building wrong buildings everywhere and just destroying their economy. Like, it'd be cool if that happens sometimes, but if it happens all the time, that's obviously not fun. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they balance this out and get it to actually work the right way, and how it works, and making sure as a player you can understand how it works, because it does have that choice of complexity. But if your economy just goes to goes to the wall and you don't understand why, that will be obviously put people off playing. So yeah, cool. So that's all about Bankruptcy. We're going to talk about the bottom bit in a second. It's cool. I like how it works. It's more in depth than how a lot of grand strategy games work, where you just run out of money and you just press a button and you go bankrupt or something else happens. So I like this. Overall, again, the UI I quite like. You can see everything. It's super obvious how everything's working. You can see how much money you're making. You can hover over this. Tooltip tells you why. So the UI quite nice. I think it could do with a bit of jazzing up maybe, but I think it does what it's supposed to do. And then modability, obviously, as always, they're going to talk about how you can change the system, bankruptcy system, how it works, who does what, everything. So if you're into modding, read this up. I'll put a link, as always, in the description down below. And then, yeah, thank you for reading. While the winter holidays are fast approaching, we're gearing up for a period of intense development over the next 2 months. So they're basically saying it is coming up to the first anniversary of the game announcement, which, yeah, it's already come around that quick. So I want to make a special occasion count. So it looks like there'll be no Dev Diary on New Year's Eve or in January. So there'll be no Dev Diary next month. But they're working on getting the game into a playable state. So hopefully that means in February there'll be a Dev Diary and they'll show off the game. Like, that's what I've been talking about the last couple of Dev Diaries. I really want to see, like, the game playing, or at least, you know, not like a full game, even just like a year of the game and how it looks, how it plays. It's still obviously quite early in development, so I'm not going to take it as, oh, this is how the game's going to look and this is how it's going to play, but I kind of just want to see something of how it looks, because we've seen, you know, they've discussed a lot of stuff, they've shown a lot of screenshots. I think they showed the map off in the very first Dev Diary, and then we've just seen this kind of overlaid version like this ever since. So I just kind of want to see what the game looks like and kind of how a year in the life of Grey Eminence, kind of in-game, how it plays versus other games. And of course, it's not the finished game or anything. I'm not going to hold it up as, oh, this is how the game is going to be when it launches. But I quite like to, at this point, see it running for a little bit, just so we can put into perspective all these Dev Diaries. And like I say, in the future, I guess we're going to get some on wars, we're going to get stuff on population things again, or navies and armies and all that good stuff. So I think at least seeing a little bit of how the game looks and plays will give us a bit of context for how they're actually going to work in the game, because everything sounded really good, but kind of piecing it all together is going to be great. So anyway, if you've enjoyed today's video, hit that like button. Helps other people find the channel and the game in the future, because I don't see a lot of talk about Grey Eminence. I know it's still early, like I say, in development, but I kind of thought it would get a bit more buzz than it has. But yeah, so hit like, helps other people find the channel and the videos in the future. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel. I'm covering the Dev Diaries to Grey Eminence. I also play Crusader Kings, Paradox games, and things like that on the channel, if that's your kind of thing. But we're going to leave it there for today. We won't be back next month for another one, but in February, hopefully, we'll get some cool info. As always, if you join their Discord and subreddit, they do answer a lot of questions on there. So if you're interested in learning more, do go and join those. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.